Morning television is supposed to feel safe, predictable. Smiles, light applause, carefully timed jokes before the commercial break. But sometimes, live TV stops being comfortable. Sometimes a single question shifts the energy in a room so fast you can almost hear it happen. And that's exactly what unfolded when Jared Leto sat across the table from Whoopi Goldberg on The View. Before we go any further, make sure you're subscribed to Prime Talk, hit like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Because this wasn't just another celebrity interview. It was one of those rare, unfiltered daytime television moments that people still reference when they talk about live broadcasts gone tense. The setting seemed routine at first. The iconic round table. The panel of hosts. The studio audience ready with applause. For decades, The View has thrived on conversation, sometimes heated, often political, always direct. It's a space where celebrities are expected to answer more than just promotional questions. They are asked about their choices, their controversies, their public image. And Jared Leto, known for his intense acting style and equally intense public persona, was no stranger to scrutiny. By the time he walked onto that stage, Leto had already built a career defined by transformation. From Oscar-winning performances to leading a global rock band, he has cultivated an image of artistic dedication that borders on obsession. Admirers call him fearless. Critics call him eccentric. But few would argue that he's ever been boring. Whoopi Goldberg, on the other hand, has spent decades mastering the art of cutting through noise. An Academy Award winner, a veteran of stage and screen, and one of the most recognizable voices in daytime television, she doesn't waste words. On The View, she's known for her calm delivery and the way she can ask a pointed question without raising her voice. That contrast, Leto's intensity and Goldberg's composure, was always going to create friction. The question was whether it would remain respectful conversation or escalate into something more. On that day, the audience expected the usual format. Promote the latest project. Share a funny behind-the-scenes story. Smile for the camera. Move on. But the timing of the interview made it different. Leto had been navigating renewed public scrutiny. Discussions about his immersive acting methods had resurfaced online. Stories from past film sets were circulating again, dissected and debated by fans and critics alike. There were questions about leadership, about boundaries, about what artistic commitment really means in an industry increasingly conscious of workplace culture. Meanwhile, The View had sharpened its reputation for addressing cultural accountability head-on. When celebrities stepped onto that stage, they knew they weren't guaranteed a purely celebratory segment. From the opening moments, something felt slightly off. The introductions were warm enough. Applause filled the studio. Leto smiled, leaning forward, hands clasped together. Goldberg welcomed him with her trademark steady tone. But beneath the pleasantries, there was an undercurrent. A sense that this conversation might drift beyond safe territory. Goldberg began with the expected topics: career milestones, creative risks, the discipline required to transform physically and emotionally for a role. Leto answered with measured thoughtfulness, speaking about dedication, collaboration, and respect for craft. Yet even in those early exchanges, viewers noticed the pacing. Goldberg wasn't rushing. She was listening closely. Waiting. Live television has a rhythm. Hosts build momentum, then pivot. And when that pivot comes, there's no editing room to soften it. No opportunity to cut away. What made this moment so significant wasn't shouting. It wasn't chaos. It was the simplicity of a question asked at exactly the right time. The View has always walked a line between entertainment and accountability. Political leaders, actors, musicians, no one is immune from being challenged. But when a guest's public narrative clashes with cultural conversations, tension becomes inevitable. For Leto, whose career thrives on intensity and control, sitting in a format he couldn't direct presented a unique dynamic. On a film set, he's immersed in character. On stage with his band, he commands thousands. But here, the spotlight belonged equally to the host. As the segment progressed, the co-hosts chimed in with lighter commentary. A joke here. A compliment there. The audience laughed on cue. Everything seemed balanced. Until Goldberg shifted the tone. She leaned slightly back in her chair, her hands folded. Her voice remained even, but the phrasing changed. Instead of asking about art, she referenced perception. Instead of focusing on accolades, she touched on responsibility. It wasn't confrontational in delivery. It was precise. And that precision caught Leto's attention. He straightened almost imperceptibly. The smile that had lingered through earlier questions tightened. His answers became more deliberate, less anecdotal. The room felt smaller. Viewers at home could sense it. The energy of a live broadcast is hard to disguise. There are no retakes when body language shifts. No background music to guide emotion. Just silence between words. The stakes were larger than one interview. This was about public image in real time. About how a celebrity navigates accountability when the conversation moves from praise to scrutiny. For Goldberg, it was business as usual. Ask the question, let the guest respond. For Leto, it was a moment that required recalibration. Defensiveness can read poorly. Over-explaining can appear evasive. Staying calm becomes essential. But calm doesn't always mean comfortable. The audience, sensing the change, grew quieter. Laughter faded. Applause paused. Cameras captured close-ups that lingered just a second longer than usual. This was still morning television. Still a panel discussion. And yet, something had shifted. The moment that would define the interview was approaching, but it hadn't fully arrived. Not yet, because sometimes the most dramatic part of a live confrontation isn't the question itself. It's the seconds before it's finished being asked. And in those seconds, you could see it, the realization that this conversation was no longer routine. What happened next would ripple far beyond that studio table, reshaping how viewers interpreted both the host and the guest. And it all hinged on a single exchange that no one in that room could rewind. By the time Jared Leto took his seat at the table, the public conversation surrounding him had already evolved. His career had always existed in extremes, extreme transformations, extreme performances, extreme commitment to character. For years, that intensity was celebrated as proof of dedication. But as Hollywood itself began re-examining long-standing practices, stories that once sounded impressive started being reconsidered under a different lens. Leto's Oscar win for his role in Dallas Buyers Club cemented him as one of the most transformative actors of his generation. He lost significant weight for the role, immersed himself completely in character, and spoke openly about the psychological toll it took. Audiences applauded the sacrifice. Industry peers praised the commitment. It became part of his brand. Then came the superhero era. His portrayal of the Joker in Suicide Squad sparked polarized reactions. Some fans admired the bold interpretation. Others criticized the creative direction. Around that same time, reports surfaced about the unusual methods he allegedly used to stay in character. Media outlets revisited claims from co-stars about unexpected on-set behavior meant to heighten realism. While many described it as method acting taken seriously, others questioned where professionalism ended and performance began. None of these stories were new. But cultural context had shifted. Hollywood was no longer viewing intensity in isolation. Conversations about workplace boundaries, power dynamics, and accountability were becoming mainstream. Actors were being asked not just about their art, but about their responsibility within collaborative spaces. That shift made any high-profile interview inherently more layered. Meanwhile, The View had been leaning into sharper conversations. The panel frequently addressed cultural debates head-on, often bringing those discussions directly to their guests. Whoopi Goldberg, in particular, had built a reputation for asking measured but direct questions. She rarely raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her tone carried authority shaped by decades in the industry. In the weeks leading up to Leto's appearance, online discourse had resurfaced older interviews and anecdotes. Social media thrives on recontextualizing moments. Clips were circulating again. Commentary threads debated artistic freedom versus professional conduct. While nothing new had officially emerged, the volume of discussion had increased. For a celebrity in the middle of promoting a project, that timing matters. Press tours are carefully structured. Publicists coordinate appearances to highlight work, redirect narratives, and reinforce image. Morning shows are typically safer environments compared to late-night satire or hard journalism platforms. But The View doesn't function like a standard promotional stop. Its format encourages dialogue rather than scripted praise. That distinction changes the temperature in the room. Producers likely prepared for a balanced segment, celebrating Leto's career while acknowledging the broader conversations surrounding him. That's how live television works. It's about contrast. Shine light on accomplishments, but don't ignore context. For Leto, preparation would have been essential. High-profile figures understand that even casual phrasing can turn into headlines. Every word on live television is archived, clipped, and replayed. As the day approached, anticipation quietly built online. Fans announced they'd be watching. Commentators speculated whether the panel would address the ongoing debates. Would the conversation stay focused on his latest work? Or would it pivot? When Leto entered the studio that morning, the atmosphere appeared standard. Makeup lights, crew members adjusting microphones, audience members settling into seats. Yet live television always carries unpredictability. There's no safety net. Whoopi Goldberg had moderated countless difficult conversations before. Political leaders, controversial authors, outspoken celebrities. She'd sat across from them all. Her approach rarely changed. Let the guest speak. Listen. Then, if necessary, press further. That steadiness can feel disarming. As the interview began, early questions centered on craft. Leto spoke about preparation, collaboration, and the emotional layers of his recent projects. He articulated his philosophy of immersion, the idea that fully inhabiting a character creates authenticity on screen. His tone was reflective, even philosophical. But beneath that reflection lingered the larger narrative. The cultural question wasn't whether method acting works. It was whether the boundaries of that method respect everyone involved. Goldberg's co-hosts added commentary, some light-hearted, some curious. They referenced his career longevity, his music with 30 Seconds to Mars, and the unique duality of balancing acting with touring. The audience responded warmly. Still, tension doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it accumulates quietly through subtext. The View has a history of pivoting conversations at unexpected moments. Just when the audience settles into routine, a host reframes the discussion. That pivot was coming. What made this particular interview more delicate was the generational dynamic. Goldberg represents an era of Hollywood shaped by different expectations. Leto represents a generation that pushed boundaries in pursuit of realism. The intersection of those perspectives was inevitable. Public perception also plays a powerful role. For some viewers, Leto embodies fearless artistry. For others, he symbolizes a style of performance that may not align with evolving standards. That split perception meant any response he gave would resonate differently across audiences. As the segment moved forward, the energy began to subtly shift. Goldberg leaned into nuance. She acknowledged dedication while hinting at broader responsibility. It was a careful setup, not accusatory, but unmistakably pointed. Live television demands split-second reactions. There's no opportunity to consult a publicist mid-answer. No pause button. Leto maintained composure. His posture remained upright, his tone steady, but the rhythm of his responses changed. He chose words more deliberately. Pauses grew slightly longer. For viewers paying attention, those pauses were telling. The conversation was approaching the crossroads between art and accountability, between admiration and inquiry. And in that narrowing space, the question that would redefine the interview was forming. No dramatic music signaled its arrival. No raised voices warned of impact. Just a host prepared to ask what many viewers were already thinking, and a guest who would have to decide, in real time, how to answer. The stage was set. The audience was silent. The cameras were locked in. What happened next would unfold without edits, without filters, and without the comfort of hindsight. The shift happened quietly. There was no dramatic introduction, no audible gasp from the audience. The conversation simply slowed. Whoopi Goldberg leaned slightly forward, her expression steady, her tone measured. The studio lights reflected off the table's surface, and for a brief second, the room felt smaller than it had moments before. Jared Leto had just finished describing the discipline behind one of his more physically demanding roles. He spoke about commitment, about disappearing into character, about respecting the story above all else. The audience responded with polite applause. Goldberg nodded. Then she paused. It wasn't a long pause. But on live television, even 2 seconds of silence carries weight. She folded her hands lightly on the table and chose her words carefully. She acknowledged his dedication. She acknowledged the praise he's received over the years. And then, calmly, she referenced the broader conversation that had followed him. Stories about immersive techniques on set, about remaining in character between takes, about the effect that intensity can have on the people working around you. Her voice didn't sharpen. It didn't accuse. It simply asked, at what point does commitment to a role require accountability to collaborators? The question hung in the air. There was no music cue. No cutaway shot to soften the moment. The camera stayed on Leto. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. The easy promotional smile faded into something more controlled. He inhaled slowly, lips pressing together before he responded. His posture remained upright, but his shoulders squared slightly, as if bracing. For a split second, the audience didn't react. They seemed to sense this was no longer a standard presto exchange. Leto began carefully. He spoke about respect, about how filmmaking is always a collaborative process. He emphasized trust. He described the difference between myth and reality, suggesting that narratives sometimes grow larger than the truth. Goldberg listened without interruption. The co-hosts remained still, their usual interjections absent. It was clear this was no longer about promoting a project. It was about perception. Goldberg followed up, not aggressively, but precisely. She clarified that dedication isn't under question. The question, she explained, is how intensity translates in shared professional spaces. She mentioned how cultural standards evolve, how workplaces, including film sets, are being re-evaluated. Again, her tone stayed even. Leto's response this time carried more edge, not hostility, but firmness. He stated that art has always required risk, that pushing boundaries can make people uncomfortable. He acknowledged that stories circulate but suggested that context often disappears in retelling. His words were composed, but his cadence had changed. The pauses between sentences grew longer. He looked directly at Goldberg as he spoke, no longer glancing toward the audience for reinforcement. The tension wasn't explosive. It was restrained. One of the co-hosts attempted to lighten the tone with a brief comment about creative passion, but the energy didn't fully reset. The room had already shifted. Goldberg leaned back slightly, then delivered the line that reframed the entire moment. She said that accountability and artistry aren't opposites. That respecting boundaries doesn't weaken performance, it strengthens collaboration. There was no accusation in her voice, only clarity. Leto responded more directly now. He said he has always aimed to create safe environments, that any suggestion otherwise misrepresents his intentions. He acknowledged that he's passionate, intensely so, but denied crossing professional lines. The audience remained unusually quiet. The cameras alternated between close-ups. Leto's jaw tightened briefly before he relaxed it. Goldberg's expression remained neutral, attentive. This was live. No edits. No time delay. Another pause. Goldberg asked one final question, whether, in hindsight, he would approach certain roles differently given today's cultural climate. The simplicity of the question amplified its weight. Leto took a breath. This time the silence stretched longer. He looked down briefly, then back up. He said growth is part of any long career. That reflection is necessary. But he also defended the idea that transformative art requires deep immersion. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't defiance. It was a careful line between acknowledgement and defense. The exchange lasted only a few minutes. But in live television terms, it felt longer. The absence of laughter made every word echo louder. Goldberg nodded once more, signaling closure without declaring victory. She thanked him for addressing the conversation directly. Her tone softened slightly as she transitioned to the next topic. But the atmosphere didn't fully recover. The audience applause that followed felt polite rather than enthusiastic. The rhythm of the show had been disrupted, even if only briefly. Leto maintained composure through the remainder of the segment. He answered lighter questions. He smiled when appropriate. But the earlier ease never completely returned. For viewers at home, the moment stood out precisely because it wasn't dramatic in the traditional sense. There was no shouting, no walk-off, no viral outburst. It was tension expressed through restraint. A host asking what many were thinking. A guest defending his philosophy without retreating. And an entire exchange unfolding in real time, unfiltered. When the segment ended and the show cut to commercial, the cameras stopped rolling for the public. But the impact of those few minutes had already begun spreading beyond the studio. Because sometimes the most powerful confrontations aren't loud. They are quiet enough that everyone leans in. And in that quiet, every word matters. When the show returned from commercial break, the atmosphere in the studio had subtly changed. The conversation moved forward, as live television always does. Segments are timed. Topics rotate. The rhythm must continue. But for those who had just witnessed the exchange, there was a lingering awareness that something significant had taken place. Jared Leto maintained composure. He smiled when appropriate. He responded to follow-up questions about upcoming projects and creative ambitions. Yet the earlier lightness never fully returned. His tone was still professional, but more guarded. The ease that marked the opening minutes had been replaced by careful precision. Whoopi Goldberg handled the transition the way seasoned hosts do. She did not revisit the tension. She did not dramatize it. She simply moved the show along, giving space for the interview to regain balance. That restraint spoke volumes. By not escalating, she reinforced that the exchange had been intentional, not personal. In the studio, applause resumed, but it felt measured rather than exuberant. Audience members were attentive, perhaps processing what they had just seen. Live broadcasts rarely allow viewers time to absorb complex exchanges in real time. But this one lingered. Once the episode ended, the real impact began outside the studio walls. Clips from the segment started circulating online within hours. Viewers dissected body language. They replayed Goldberg's phrasing. They analyzed Leto's pauses. On social media platforms, the exchange was framed in multiple ways, some calling it a necessary moment of accountability, others describing it as an unfair spotlight on long-debated stories. Because the confrontation had been calm rather than explosive, interpretation became subjective. Media outlets picked up the clip, embedding short excerpts accompanied by headlines emphasizing the tension. Some focused on Goldberg's pointed question about accountability. Others highlighted Leto's firm defense of artistic emotion. The nuance of the full conversation sometimes narrowed into brief, attention-grabbing summaries. That's the nature of modern media cycles. For Leto, the moment did not derail his career. He continued promoting his projects. He appeared at premieres. He maintained his public schedule. But interviews that followed showed subtle shifts. When asked about immersive acting, his answers included more emphasis on collaboration and communication. The language felt slightly recalibrated. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a public apology tour. It was refinement. For Goldberg, the exchange reinforced her reputation as a steady moderator willing to ask difficult questions without spectacle. She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse. She simply articulated a question reflective of broader cultural conversations. That distinction mattered. The View has long operated at the intersection of entertainment and social commentary. When celebrities appear, they step into that intersection willingly. The show's format doesn't guarantee comfort, it guarantees conversation. In the weeks that followed, commentators referenced the exchange as an example of how live television still holds unique power. In an era of heavily edited digital content, a real-time moment, unfiltered and unrehearsed, can feel rare. There was no opportunity for Leto's team to revise his wording. No post-production smoothing. Just a direct exchange between host and guest. Industry observers noted that the moment reflected a larger shift in Hollywood. Actors are no longer asked only about craft. They are asked about culture, about responsibility, about how artistic choices intersect with evolving workplace standards. The clash on The View didn't create that conversation. It mirrored it. For fans of Leto, the segment demonstrated his willingness to answer difficult questions head-on. He did not deflect or leave. He stayed. He responded. For critics, it reinforced the idea that public figures must continually reassess how their methods align with modern expectations. What changed instantly wasn't his career trajectory, it was the framing. From that point forward, discussions about Leto's immersive style almost always included reference to accountability. The two themes became linked in public discourse. Goldberg's role in that linkage was subtle but pivotal. By phrasing her question without hostility, she allowed viewers to draw their own conclusions. That neutrality strengthened the impact. Television historians often point to explosive confrontations as defining moments. But sometimes the quieter exchanges endure longer. They become reference points because they reflect larger cultural transitions rather than isolated drama. Years from now, when conversations arise about how Hollywood navigated the shift toward greater workplace awareness, clips like this will likely resurface, not as scandals, but as snapshots of change in progress. The power of the moment lies in its restraint. There was no shouting match, no viral meltdown, just two seasoned professionals engaging in a conversation that could not be edited or undone. And that is what makes live television uniquely consequential. For viewers multitasking at home, the exchange may have lasted only a few minutes. But in those minutes, an evolving industry debate entered a mainstream daytime platform, framed not as accusation but as inquiry. That still matters. Because when public figures sit down in front of millions, every question asked, and every answer given, becomes part of a broader narrative. If you appreciate deep, professional breakdowns of the most powerful live TV moments in celebrity culture, make sure you subscribe to Prime Talk, hit like, share this video, and tell us in the comments what you think. Was this a necessary question or an uncomfortable overstep? On Prime Talk, we don't chase gossip. We examine the moments that shape perception and the conversations that continue long after the cameras stop rolling.